We're calling this series The Question No One's Asking, but we're hoping it becomes the question that everyone asks. That at every phase of your journey, at every stage of your life, that you will begin to ask this question. And we're telling you it's not a one and done question. It's not a ask it one time and then it's over. And the reason for that is because at every stage of your life, at every decision that you face, every invitation you come across, the answer to this question may be different based on your current circumstances. It is a question to ask when you're facing major decisions. It's a question to ask when you're just deciding, am I going to move? Am I going to sell my house? Am I going to get married? Am I going to take that job? It's a question that has the potential to save you time, to save you money, to save you resources. It is a question that has the potential to save your marriage. It's a question that has the potential to keep a child where the child needs to be or bring a child back home. It has the potential to help your world from falling apart. Perhaps your greatest regret is something that if you could go back and undo something, you would, and possibly something you could have avoided had you asked this question. We began last week with the words of Paul from Ephesians chapter 5. He was writing to some Christ followers who were in many ways a lot like us. They lived in the town of Ephesus, and he gave them some very good advice. He comes on the scene and he says this, starting in verse 15. Be very careful then how you live. I changed this verse this week and I begin to make it personal to me. And I begin to say, be very careful, Tom, how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise. He says, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. I don't think there's another verse in Scripture that really describes our days better than perhaps this verse does. That when we look around, we see evil all around us. And Paul really tells us in the same way that he told them years ago that if you want to make the most of every opportunity, if you want to avoid the pitfalls there are out there in the world as you navigate this thing called life, then I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to live as wise people, not as unwise people. So the question we're asking you to ask is this: what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Not what's the legal thing to do. I mean, most of us already know what the legal thing to do is. And maybe asking at some point in your life, what's the legal thing to do? Maybe that's a good question to ask, but it's not the best question to ask. Don't do things that are illegal. Don't speed. Don't do weed unless you're in a state where you're supposed to. No, don't even do that. I shouldn't have said that. Just don't do it altogether. Don't steal your neighbor's car. Most of us already know what's legal. This is a better question than what's legal. This is even a better question than what's right. Because sometimes I'll think, well, what's the right thing to do? And maybe that's a good question to ask. And maybe there are times in your life where you want to ask that question, what is the right thing to do? But this question is better than the right thing to do. Because what has happened in our society is we've kind of drawn a line in the sand, and on this side of it, things are right. On this side of it, things are wrong. And what has happened is people have tried to get as close to the line as they can. And when Paul says, don't be unwise, live as wise, he's saying, stay away from the line. Stay as far away from the line as you can. And if Satan has a word for you today, you know what his word would be? Get close to that line. I mean, be as right as you can without being wrong. Go over here. And what happens, if that's your motto, if you're always looking for what's the right thing to do, if that's the question that you're asking, you know what it really implies? Is that your goal is really not to be as much like Jesus as you can. It really implies your goal is to be as much like the enemy as you can, but still be counted right. This is a better question, what's the right thing to do? This is a better question than all of those others. Even, I was looking and thinking about that line that's in the sand and how close I can get to it. My almost 3-year-old grandson was having a discussion, as a 3-year-old can, with his parents. He had done something, and his mom and dad, Aaron and Kristen, had looked and told him something to do, and he looked back and said, no. Well, Aaron was telling me this, and my heart started beating fast, and I thought, oh, what did you do? What did you do? And he goes, I looked back at Eli, and I said, Eli, don't say no. And he said, Eli went, how about nope? I'll get as close to no as I can and still be within what you said. And sometimes if my job is just to seek to do the right thing, I'll try to say, how much can I get by with and still do the right thing? I think it's even when, if you grew up in the era that I grew up in, we wore these bracelets, what would Jesus do? But as the longer that I've been a pastor and the longer I've done this, I think it's kind of like the legal thing. We already know what Jesus would do. We already know. It's not really a matter of what would Jesus do. It's a matter of what will we do. What will we do? So the question is not what's the legal thing to do, what's the right thing to do, not even though it's a great question, and I almost feel funny saying it, not even what would Jesus do. What is the wise thing to do? The best question that I hope you'll discover over the next 4 to 5 weeks as we get into this series is that the best question is not for everybody, but for me. What's the wise thing to do? Last week we said we want you to ask that in the context of 3 different characteristics or positions in your life. We said in light of my past experiences, in light of my current circumstances, and in light of my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me? Not for everybody, not for my neighbor. What's the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past, in light of the things that I have struggled with in my past, in light of the things that have thrown up a red flag in my past, what's the right thing for me to do? And my right thing may not be your right thing at the moment. What's the wise thing to do, I mean? Because my past is not your past. You have a different past than I do. And there may be things in my past that would say, Tom, you need to stay away from that. You need to avoid that. You need to run in the opposite direction. You may have things in your past that say something totally different. So in light of your past, where you come from, what's the wise thing for you to do? In light of your current circumstances, what's the wise thing to do? I just got married. What's the wise thing to do? Don't go play golf the morning after. That just came to my mind. That was from the Holy Spirit. Anyway. In light of your current situation, I just took a new job. What's the wise thing to do? I just graduated and I'm about to be out in a place on my own in another city. What's the wise thing to do? And in light of my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? Young men, young women, in light of what you want to tell the person that you will one day stand at an altar with for life, what's the wise way to date now? In light of what you want to be or not be addicted to at one point in your life, what's the wise thing to watch now? What's the wise place to go on the internet? In light of what you want to be able to tell your kids one day about your life, what's the wise thing to do now? In light of when you want to retire and with what you want to retire, what's the wise thing to do today? In light of the relationships you want with your neighbors, what's the wise thing to do? The best question is not just what's right, or not just what's legal, or even sometimes not just what's moral, but what's the wise thing to do? And a man named Solomon, who wrote the book of Proverbs, said to be the wisest man who ever lived. He wrote 3 books that we have, 3 best-selling books. And in one of those books, the book of Proverbs, he wrote about life. And in this book, he gives us some powerful insights. And he describes 4 groups of people. And what we're going to do over this week and next week, today we're going to describe the first 2. Next week, we're going to describe the second 2. And then we're going to go back and read that chapter in light of you already hearing the descriptions about these. So in the book of Proverbs, the first category of people he talks about are wise people. And I'm going to kind of put them over here as a category of people, wise people. And he says, wise people, when we get to the text later on, the wise people are the people who have said, in light of my past, what do I need to do? In light of my current circumstances, what do I need to do? In light of my future hopes and dreams, what do I need to do? What are the decisions I need to make? And he puts wise in a category over here. And then the 3 other categories he mentions, he puts them over here. And he really sets us up and he plays wise against these other three. And he says, if you're not pursuing the path of wisdom, then guess what? By default, you are pursuing the paths of one of these other three over here. And this series really comes with a warning. And the warning doesn't apply over here to the wise. There is no warning with the wise. It's just be wise, make the wise decision, go after it with everything you've got. No warning. Over here, there's a warning. Any of these three that we're going to talk about, and we'll tell you as we go through them what the warning is. But one warning I wanted to tell you this morning is these three can be offensive. These three, when you look at them, you may think, I don't even like the terminology that's there. I want to tell you, Solomon may offend you. I had to get over even some of the words that he uses to describe certain people. So I'm asking you, if something in you begins to boil up and you begin to think, I don't like that. There's some tension there. If you want to be mad at somebody, I'm going to ask you, be mad at Solomon. Don't be mad at me. And if you want to write somebody an email or a letter, write your email, put it out there, and then address it to Solomon@Comcast.net, whatever you want to do, and send it on. And I don't know what Solomon in our world will get it. But one of the things you need to know about Solomon, not only they say, but he said, asked for wisdom and was the wisest man who ever lived. They said there was none wiser than him. Even God said that about him. He wrote 3 best-selling books that have been in the collection of books we call the Bible for years. Sold more books than probably any of us will ever sell in our lifetime. He is richer than any of us and all of us even combined. So it might be worth our effort to look at what he says. And even if it is a little bit offensive, to say, you know what? Could what Solomon be saying apply to me, and should I take note of it? And here's the deal. If the hairs on your back of your neck begin to rise up, I'm going to ask you to just breathe deep and go, all right, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this. I can just listen. And that's what I want to encourage you to do, is just listen. But if you listen, and if you come to the point in your life where you say, you know what, I've listened and I've heard, but I don't think I'm going to do it, you will have found out something about yourself. You will have found out that you may not even have your own best interest at heart. So I'm just going to ask you to listen as we go through here. I hope that's a deal. Now, Solomon, as we said, is comparing wisdom to 3 different other categories over here. And he says, if you're not pursuing this, you are pursuing these 3. And the first one that he's going to mention, if you want to go home this week and read really Proverbs chapter 1 all the way to Proverbs chapter 9, it's basically all in chapter 1, but there are references that we're going to make that go all the way up to chapter 9. He says the first one is what Solomon calls the simple person. The simple. The reason they are not wise is not because they're against it. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they want to go out and ruin their life. He says the reason they're not wise yet is because they lack something that older people have. Do you know what that thing is? Experience. I heard somebody say experience. They're not simple people because they just set out to be a simple person. He said they're simple because they just haven't lived long enough. They don't have the life experience. Some of you may call them clueless. Have you ever seen somebody or heard them and you go, well, they're just clueless. They don't really know what in the world is going on. They're not evil. They're not dumb. They just don't have a clue as to what's happening. And you think, well, they'll find out when they grow up a little bit. Taylor Swift wrote a song that kind of summarizes it. She said this in her song: when you are 15 and somebody tells you they love you, you're going to believe them. Hey, you got some Taylor Swift people in the house this morning. She said, when you're 15 and somebody says they love you, you're going to believe them. Not because they're right, not because of all the other that they've studied the facts and they know all about your life. But she says, when you're 15 and some cute boy walks by and says, hey, gorgeous, whoop, I love you, you're going to believe him, because you're 15 and you want to. It's not your fault. You're just 15. It's like when I tell Eli something at 3, he'll believe me no matter what I tell him. He takes it for man, Pop said that. It must be true. The same thing he says happens with life. It's not that you intend to. It's just because you don't have the life experience yet. The simple person responds to instructions from the wise person. He says, if the wise person is here and the wise person tells the simple person something, the simple person is likely to say, don't worry about it. I mean, everybody's doing it. Everybody, ever heard that? Everybody's doing that. The wise person is going to tell the simple person something. The simple person is going to look back and say, but I can handle it. It won't happen to me. I'm different than everyone else out there. I've heard hundreds of times that. How many times growing up did I have my kids and they might say, Dad, everybody's doing it, or you're overreacting. And the older person looks back and the older person says, you know what? Maybe you think I'm overreacting, but I've seen people in that situation. And I'm a little bit past it now. And I saw that it didn't work for them. I'm concerned because I've seen consequences in life. And one thing you need to know, students, about your parents is this. We have gone through it. And we can say it and say it and say it. But the one thing you don't have is experience. Because you've never made the choices yet that have led you to the place where you can't pay your electric bill, or you're having to choose between your electric bill or eating. You're not on your third or fourth marriage looking back and saying, I wish I could have done it differently. You've not made the horrible financial decisions that every credit card person in the world are going to send you a credit thing and, well, I can just charge, and if I can charge, I must have money. You haven't been in that situation yet. Solomon is not putting you down by saying that's simple. He is just saying you don't have the experience that it has taken. So Solomon is asking you to do something. He's asking you to trust, because you haven't been in those situations yet. So if you are young this morning, if you're 15 or 17 or you're 21 years old, or you're maybe like people accuse me of, you're 30, Tom, when are you going to grow up one day? You're still acting like you're that age. I got a message for you today. Wear your skinny jeans. Do all the things that young people do. Buy the clothes that have more holes than fabric on them. Pay what you need to get them, I guess. Go to TJ Maxx. They're a little bit cheaper. Get on the team. Go to the coffee shop. Buy a $6 latte. Wear socks that look funny and weird and we all look at them. Do all of those things. Join the team. Swim it. Catch it. Do all those things. But don't think that you have to give up wisdom to do those things. Don't think that you have to go along with the crowd to still have your teenage years, because I'm going to tell, or your young adult years, because you are in a unique position. You are in a position that many of us would like to be in as older people, because you have the opportunity to get it right the first time. You have the opportunity. I don't know how many people my age would choose to just go back and say, hey, I want to live my teenage and my 20s and maybe my early 30s over again. I don't know how many of you would do that. But I know this, if all of us, I bet you the vast majority of you would say what I'm about to say is true. If we had the opportunity and we were made to go back and live those years over again, we would like to do it with the wisdom that we've collected over the last 55 years. Because some of our biggest regrets are things that we chose. But here's the deal. If you want that type of wisdom, you're going to have to seek it. Because unfortunately, the main way that we get it is we learn the hard way. We don't listen. So I'm going to tell you 3 ways. If you find yourself in that category, maybe you are a young person, or maybe you're just young at heart and you've kind of never grown up. Here are 3 ways you can get wisdom. The first one is this. Those 2 alien people who brought you into this world, we call them parents. Listen to them. Listen to them. They're not out to make your job as a teenager or your life less fun. I promise you, only because I've been there. Everything that Linda and I did as a parent was because we wanted our children to avoid some of the pitfalls, some that we made ourselves and some that we saw our friends make, and we know where that road leads. The second way you can get wisdom is this, is ask an older person. Ask an older person. And by older, I don't mean you have to find somebody who's 80, although I will tell you something real quick. I was feeling pretty good about my time in the marathon because I just wanted to finish less than 5 hours, and I was like 4 hours and 49 minutes. And I was feeling pretty good about that until I looked at the roster and saw that a 71-year-old man beat me by 1 hour and 45 minutes. I thought, oh my heavens, like, I got to step up my game. I don't know if I'm going to be doing that at any time soon. But look for wisdom in older people. Look at what they do. And by older, I just mean somebody who maybe is a little bit further ahead of the game than I am. Let me tell you, when I think he was here at first service, and I didn't say this at first service, and maybe I should have, but there's a guy here named Richard Frankel, and I have got now to sit down and just and eat with him and just have a conversation with him. And I'm going to guess Richard maybe is 70s. I don't know. So he's maybe 15 years ahead of the game where I am. But there is so much wisdom in that guy. When he looked back and said, Tom, if I could have done it like this, or I did do it like this, or this is the mistake that I made, or this is how we do it differently, or this is what we can do for a church for our young people now. Find somebody who's a little bit ahead of the game. And then number 3, which really should be number 1, but I wanted you to remember it last because I think it is often best, is ask God for it. Ask God for it. If you are 9 years old and you're in here this morning, you are not too young to ask God to help you make wise decisions. If you are 20 years old, or if you are 57, or if you are 70 years old, you are not too young or too old to ask God for wisdom. And James, the guy who grew up in the house with Jesus, can you imagine growing up in the house with Jesus? I mean, that's a lot to live up to. No wonder half of them didn't even believe in him till later on. But James, his half-brother, comes back later on in his life and is convinced that Jesus is the Son of God. He's convinced so much that he gives his life for him. And he gave us some advice in the book of James. He says, if any of you lack wisdom, if any of you think, I don't know where to go, I don't know where to turn, this is what I want you to do. I want you to ask my brother. I want you to ask God. And I tell you something, he will give it to you. So ask him. Ask your Heavenly Father for wisdom, no matter what age you are. And here's the last thing I want to say, maybe about that. And maybe I'll go ahead and call the band and the praise team on back up. And if you're getting ready to serve communion to us this morning, go ahead and get into place. The last thing I want to say to you about this first seat over here, the simple, is this. Whether you're still very young or whether you're kind of older but you think young and think, maybe I could fall into that category. Maybe I am one of those people. I just don't even really think about some of the things that I do. This is what I want you to remember. And for those of you who graduated and you're going off to college, I'm going to have it on the screen. Write it down. Put it somewhere. I tried to go by every table and tell them, take a bulletin today. It's got our emails on the back. If you get away from here and you have a question or you need some help or you need somebody to just come to your school and talk to you, we will make you a deal. One of us will be there. We will get to where you are. But here's what I want to ask you to do. Put it on the screen for me, Atlanta. Don't give up or don't trade in what you want most in your future for what you want in the moment. Don't give up what you will want most one day for what you only want in the moment today. Every invitation, every opportunity, every decision, ask yourself, in light of my past and where I've been, in light of what I'm doing now, away from home, maybe for the first time, and in light of where I want to be someday, the person I want to marry, the man or the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, the children I want to have, the job I want to have, not what's the right thing, not what's the legal thing, but what's the wise thing? What's the wise thing for me to do? And I promise you, if you not only ask but answer that, your life will be better. And you will be better at life. Because Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, said if you would pursue this path, when we get to the very end, he said it's like God shines this big light down on you and he illuminates your way as you go. And one day I think like many of us, you will be grateful that you chose the path of wisdom, even when it was hard, even when they didn't let you in the club or they kicked you off the team. There will be a time you look back and you will be grateful that you chose the path of wisdom.